He wants the ranch, Your Honor. The one my father bled for. The one he never set foot on until after we married. My name is Kimberly. I'm 45 years old, and I run a manufacturing company in Tulsa, Oklahoma. At least I used to think I ran it. Turns out my husband had been telling people he built it all along. I sat in that courtroom 3 months ago, watching him perform. That's what it was. A performance. He wore the suit I bought him 2 Christmases back, the charcoal one with the subtle pinstripe. He stood there like he owned the room, like he owned me, and told the judge how he sacrificed everything to help me succeed. The lie came out smooth, practiced. Your Honor, I put my career on hold to support her business. I managed operations, handled finances, built relationships with suppliers. Without me, Thornwind Manufacturing would have collapsed in the first year. I watched the judge's face. He was listening, actually considering it. My lawyer, Patricia, squeezed my hand under the table. She'd warned me this would be ugly. Divorce always is when money's involved. But $10.5 million ugly? That was a new level. The ranch wasn't even part of the business. My father left it to me 8 years ago when he passed. It sat on 400 acres outside of Bristow, about an hour from Tulsa. Good land, cattle land. The kind of place that held 3 generations of memories in its soil. And now, my husband wanted it. I'd been feeling something shift for months before the divorce papers. Little things that didn't add up. Conversations he'd end when I walked into the room. Late nights at the office when I knew the office was closed. The way he stopped asking about my day and started telling me about his. It was Patricia who first suggested I start documenting things. She'd been my friend since college, roommates at the University of Oklahoma. When things got bad with my husband, she was the first person I called. Keep records, she'd said over coffee one morning. Emails, texts, bank statements, anything that shows the real picture. I thought she was being paranoid. My husband loved me. We'd been married 15 years. We had a life together, but I started keeping records anyway, just in case. The judge asked my husband to continue. He launched into a story about how he'd spent countless hours building relationships with clients, how he'd negotiated the contracts that made Thornwind Manufacturing what it is today, how he'd put his own dreams on hold to be my support system. Pure fiction. I started Thornwind 12 years ago with money from my father and a business loan I secured myself. My husband worked in insurance sales at the time. He had nothing to do with manufacturing, nothing to do with metal fabrication or supply chains or any of it. He helped, sure. He'd come to company events, smile at clients, play the supportive spouse. But build it? He couldn't tell you the difference between cold-rolled steel and hot-rolled if his life depended on it. The ranch claim was even more absurd. He'd been there maybe 5 times in 8 years, usually for Christmas or when we needed to check on the property manager. He'd complain the whole drive about the dust, about the isolation, about how there was nothing to do there. Now he wanted it. Patricia leaned close and whispered, "He's going for everything. The house, the business, the inheritance. All of it." I nodded. I'd expected this. What I hadn't expected was how convincing he'd sound, how the judge seemed to be buying it. My husband's lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Jeffrey, stood up next. He presented documents, financial statements showing joint accounts, tax returns with both our names, a mortgage where we were both listed. Your Honor, my client isn't asking for anything unreasonable. He's simply requesting his fair share of the marital assets he helped build. The business, the properties, the investments. All of it was a team effort. The judge nodded slowly. Mrs. Kimberly, you'll have your chance to respond. But I have to say, the documentation here is substantial. That's when I felt it. That cold drop in my stomach. The realization that I might actually lose. Not just the money, not just the ranch, but everything I'd worked for, everything my father had worked for, everything that defined who I was. My husband caught my eye across the courtroom. He smiled. Not a friendly smile, a victorious one. He thought he'd won. The trouble started long before the courtroom. I just didn't see it clearly until it was almost too late. 15 years ago, I met him at a business conference in Oklahoma City. I was 30, just starting to think seriously about launching my own company. He was charming, attentive, said all the right things about supporting ambitious women. He worked for a regional insurance company, sold policies to small businesses. Nothing glamorous, but steady. We dated for 2 years before getting married. Simple ceremony, just family and close friends. My father walked me down the aisle. He shook my husband's hand afterward and said, "Take care of her." My husband promised he would. My father died 6 years later. Heart attack while checking fence lines on the ranch. The foreman found him that evening, slumped against the old truck he'd driven since before I was born. The ranch had been in our family for 63 years. My grandfather bought it in the early 60s, built it up from nothing. My father inherited it, improved it, made it profitable. When he passed, he left it to me. Just me. The will was clear. My husband acted supportive at first. Came to the funeral, held my hand during the reading of the will, told me we'd figure out what to do with the property together. But something changed after that. Small things. He started asking questions about the ranch's value, about mineral rights, about what would happen if we sold it. I told him we weren't selling. It was family land. He'd nod and drop it. For a while. The business was thriving by then. Thornwind Manufacturing specialized in custom metal components for oil and gas equipment. We'd built a solid reputation, good clients, steady contracts. I'd worked 70-hour weeks for years to make it happen. My husband helped where he could. He'd handle some administrative tasks, answer phones when the receptionist was out, occasionally meet with suppliers if I was stuck on the production floor. But the real work, the technical knowledge, the client relationships, the strategic decisions, that was all me. Still, I appreciated what he did. Marriage is a partnership, right? I wanted to believe we were building something together. Patricia warned me early on. We'd meet for lunch every few months, catch up on life. About 3 years into the marriage, she asked me a question that stuck with me. Does he ever talk about his own goals, his own career? I thought about it. Realized I couldn't remember the last time he'd mentioned anything about his work. He'd quit the insurance job 2 years after we married. Said he wanted to focus on helping me with the business. I figured it was temporary, that he'd find something else eventually. He never did. Instead, he became more involved with Thornwind. Started sitting in on meetings, weighing in on decisions, introducing himself to clients as a partner in the business. I corrected him a few times, gently, said he was my husband, not my business partner. He'd laugh it off, say it was just semantics. But it wasn't semantics. It was a pattern. He began telling people he'd helped start the company, that he'd been there from day one, that his business knowledge had been crucial to our success. None of it was true, but he said it convincingly enough that people believed him. I noticed other things too. Money transfers I didn't recognize. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. When I asked about them, he'd have an explanation. Business expense, equipment repair, client entertainment. Always reasonable, always with just enough detail to satisfy me. Patricia's husband, David, worked in forensic accounting. One night at dinner, about a year before the divorce, he mentioned something that made my blood run cold. The easiest way to steal from a business is to be the person everyone trusts, he said. Someone with access to accounts, someone who can move money around without raising suspicion. Usually it's a family member. I laughed it off at the time, but the comment stuck with me. I started paying closer attention to the finances. Nothing dramatic, just reviewing statements more carefully, asking more questions about expenditures. My husband got defensive, said I was micromanaging, that I didn't trust him. Maybe I didn't. The ranch became another point of tension. He kept suggesting we develop it, maybe lease some of the land, bring in additional income. I refused. My father had wanted it preserved, kept as working cattle land. That's what we were going to do. He stopped asking and started demanding. The arguments got worse. He accused me of being controlling, of shutting him out of decisions. I accused him of trying to take over something he hadn't built. We'd go days without speaking, then patch things up with apologies that felt increasingly hollow. My sister, Claire, noticed the strain. She lived in Dallas but visited every few months. After one particularly tense dinner, she pulled me aside. "He's different," she said. "I don't know what it is, but something's off." She was right. He was different. Or maybe he'd always been this way, and I just refused to see it. The final straw came on a Tuesday morning. I arrived at the office early, wanted to review the quarterly financials before our accountant meeting. I opened the company bank account statements and found 3 transfers I hadn't authorized. $25,000 each, moved to an account I didn't recognize. I called the bank immediately. The transfers were legitimate, properly authorized with digital signatures. My signature. Or something that looked close enough. That's when I knew. He hadn't just been helping himself to small amounts. He'd been systematically stealing from the company, and he'd been forging my signature to do it. I sat in my office for an hour, staring at those statements. 15 years of marriage, 12 years of building a business, 8 years of managing my father's legacy. All of it contaminated by lies. I called Patricia that afternoon, told her I wanted a divorce, told her I needed to move fast, before he could hide more assets or cover his tracks better. She asked if I was sure. I was. The realization hit me in stages, like dominoes falling in slow motion. First came the financial discovery. Patricia brought in David to do a complete audit of Thornwind's accounts. It took 3 weeks. What he found made me physically sick. 78 unauthorized transfers over 4 years. Total amount, $412,000. All moved to accounts my husband had opened in both our names. Accounts I never knew existed. He'd been careful, spacing out the transfers, varying the amounts, always staying just under the threshold that would trigger automatic bank reviews. But that wasn't the worst part. David found loan applications filed in the company's name. 3 of them, totaling $600,000. All approved, all funded, all secured against Thornwind's assets. The money had been transferred to yet another account, this one solely in my husband's name. "He's been planning this for years," David said, spreading the documents across my dining room table. "This isn't opportunistic theft. It's systematic asset stripping," and Patricia added, "And if he's been doing this with the business, we need to check the ranch records too." That's when the second domino fell. My father's estate attorney was a man named Gerald, semi-retired but still handling a few long-term clients. I'd worked with him to probate the will 8 years ago. When I called him about the ranch, he sounded confused. "Didn't you and your husband refinance the property last year?" he asked. I felt ice in my veins. No, we didn't." Silence on the line. Then, "Kimberly, I think you need to come to my office, today if possible." I drove to Oklahoma City that afternoon. Gerald had a file waiting. Inside were documents I'd never seen, a refinancing application for the ranch, a new deed, filed 6 months ago, adding my husband's name to the title, loan documents secured against the property, totaling $850,000, all bearing my signature, all forged. "How is this possible?" I asked. "How did this get through without me knowing?" Gerald looked grim. The signatures looked legitimate. The documents had notary stamps, proper filing. Everything appeared in order. "But if you're telling me you didn't sign these..." "I didn't sign a damn thing." He pulled out another file. "There's more. He filed a claim against the estate 6 months ago. Said you and he had a verbal agreement that he'd receive equal ownership of the ranch in exchange for his contributions to the marriage. The claim is still pending, but if it goes through, he gets half my father's land, possibly more. His lawyer is arguing that since the ranch's value has increased during your marriage, and since he's now on the deed, he's entitled to compensation for his labor and support. I thought about my father, about him teaching me to ride horses on that land, about him showing me how to check fence lines, how to read the cattle, how to spot good grass from bad, about him trusting me to keep it safe. I'd failed him. The third domino fell when I got home that evening. My husband was there, packing a suitcase. He barely looked at me. "Going somewhere?" I asked. "Friend's place. Figured we could use some space." I stood in the doorway, blocking his exit. "We need to talk." "Not tonight, Kimberly. I'm tired." "About the $400,000 you stole from the company. About the ranch deed you forged. About the loans you took out in our names. We need to talk about all of it. Right now." He stopped packing. Turned slowly. His face showed no surprise, no shame, no fear. Just cold calculation. "You can't prove anything," he said. "I have bank statements, loan documents, signatures that don't match mine." He smiled. "You have documents that show joint accounts and joint decisions made during our marriage. That's what the court will see. A wife who's suddenly trying to cut her husband out of everything they built together. I built it. My father built the ranch. You built nothing." He picked up his suitcase. "That's not what my lawyer says, and it's not what the financial records will show. I've been very careful, Kimberly. Every transfer, every loan, every decision. There's documentation showing it was a joint effort. You might not have signed everything personally, but you authorized it through our marriage partnership." "I authorized nothing." "Good luck proving that." He moved past me toward the door. "My lawyer will be in touch. I suggest you get yourself a good attorney. You're going to need one." He left. I stood in the empty house, shaking. Not from fear, from rage. Pure, white-hot rage. He thought he'd covered his tracks. Thought he'd been clever enough, careful enough, patient enough to steal everything I had and make it look legal. Make it look like he deserved it. He was wrong. I called Patricia again. Told her everything. Told her about the loans, the forged signatures, the fake refinancing, all of it. "Can we stop him?" I asked. "Honestly, I don't know. If he's built a paper trail showing joint decisions, if he's got witnesses who'll testify he was involved in the business, he wasn't involved. Not really. But can you prove that? In court, in front of a judge, can you prove he contributed nothing while you built everything?" I couldn't answer. Because I wasn't sure. That night, I went through every file, every document, every record I had from the past 15 years. Business contracts, financial statements, property records, emails, tax returns, everything. I was looking for something, proof, evidence, anything that would show the truth. I found it at 3 a.m, an old external hard drive, buried in the back of my desk drawer. I'd used it years ago to back up company files. I plugged it in, not expecting much. Inside were years of emails, internal communications from when the business was just starting, messages between me and clients, me and suppliers, me and the bank. Every major decision documented in real time. And in every single one, I was alone. No mentions of my husband. No CCs to him. No references to his input or involvement. Just me, building a company from scratch, making every call, fighting every fight, earning every victory. I had my proof, but I had something else too. I kept digging through those old files, and I found correspondence I'd forgotten about. Messages from my father during the last year of his life. He'd been worried about something, about someone. "I don't trust him, sweetheart," one email read. "I know you love him, but something's not right. Watch your accounts. Watch your business. And whatever you do, don't let him touch the ranch. My father had known. Somehow he'd seen what I couldn't see, what I'd refused to see. The final email in the folder was dated 2 weeks before he died. I'm updating my will today. The ranch goes to you alone. Not joint, not shared, just you. That land is your future, not his. Promise me you'll protect it. I'd promised. Sitting right there in this house, on the phone with him, I'd promised to protect the ranch. I'd nearly broken that promise. But not yet. Not while I still had fight left. I spent the rest of that night organizing everything. Every document, every email, every piece of evidence that showed the truth. What my husband had done. What he'd stolen. What he'd forged. And I made a plan. He wanted everything. He wanted to stand in front of a judge and claim he built my life, built my business, earned my father's land. Fine. Let him try. But when he did, I'd be ready. The divorce papers were filed 3 days later. My husband's response came within a week, and it was worse than I'd imagined. He wasn't just asking for half. He wanted 60% of Thornwind Manufacturing, claiming his managerial contributions and business expertise had been essential to its growth. He wanted the house in Tulsa, the ranch in Bristow, and $8.2 million in liquid assets. He also demanded spousal support of $15,000 per month for 10 years. Total claim, $10.5 million plus property. Patricia laid it all out on her conference table. He's going nuclear. This isn't about fair division anymore. He's trying to take everything and leave you with nothing. Can he actually win this? She hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. He's got documentation. The joint accounts, the tax returns showing him as involved in the business, the loans with both names. And he's got 3 witnesses lined up. What witnesses? Former employees. They're prepared to testify that he was actively involved in Thornwind's operations, that he attended meetings, made decisions, contributed to strategy. I thought about the people who'd worked for me over the years, tried to figure out who would lie for him. Then I realized he'd been laying groundwork for years, being visible, inserting himself into situations, making sure people saw him as essential. What about the forged signatures? I asked. The unauthorized transfers? We'll present that evidence. But his lawyer is already arguing that as your spouse, he had implied authority to handle financial matters. They're saying the signatures might look different because of stress, or because he signed on your behalf with your knowledge. I never gave him authority to sign anything. Can you prove that? Do you have documents explicitly denying him signature authority? I couldn't, because I'd never thought I'd need to. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. Patricia warned me it would be brutal, that divorce court was designed to strip away dignity and expose every weakness. She wasn't wrong. My husband's lawyer filed motion after motion, demanding access to all business records, requesting detailed accounting of every asset, questioning the validity of my father's will, suggesting undue influence. Each filing was designed to wear me down, drain my resources, make me want to settle. I refused every settlement offer. 3 came in the first month alone, each one more insulting than the last. The final offer proposed I keep 30% of Thornwind and walk away from everything else, including the ranch. Over my dead body, I told Patricia. She smiled grimly. Then we fight. The problem was evidence. David's forensic audit clearly showed unauthorized transfers and forged documents. But my husband's legal team had created a counter-narrative. They argued every transaction was part of normal marital financial management, that the signatures were legitimate, that I was simply trying to rewrite history now that the marriage was ending. They had testimonies lined up, not just from former employees, but from business associates who'd seen him at company events, from neighbors who'd watched him leave for the office every morning, from friends who'd heard him talk about the business challenges he was navigating. All of it was smoke and mirrors. But it was convincing smoke and mirrors. I spent those 6 weeks preparing. Patricia and David helped me organize every piece of evidence we had. The old email backup showing my solo involvement in building Thornwyn. The timeline of the ranch inheritance and subsequent forgery. The bank records proving the unauthorized nature of the transfers. But we had a problem. A big one. 3 of the forged signatures had been notarized. Legitimate notary stamps, proper documentation, witnesses who'd supposedly verified my identity. My husband had been thorough. He'd found notaries who'd stamp anything for the right price, or who were careless enough not to verify signatures properly. If we can prove the notarizations were fraudulent, we can prove the forgeries, David said. But that's a criminal investigation, not a civil one. It takes time we don't have. The preliminary hearing arrived too fast. I walked into that courtroom wearing my best suit, trying to project confidence I didn't feel. My husband sat across the aisle with Jeffrey, looking relaxed, almost amused. The judge was a woman named Sandra, about 60, with a reputation for no-nonsense rulings. She reviewed the initial filings and looked up at both sides. "This is going to be complicated," she said. "I'm seeing claims of fraud, forgery, and unauthorized financial activity. I'm also seeing 15 years of marriage and substantial commingled assets. Both sides need to understand. This will not be quick or easy." My husband's lawyer stood first. "Your Honor, my client is simply seeking his fair share of the marital estate. He spent 15 years supporting his wife's career, managing household and business affairs, contributing his expertise and labor to their shared success. He's entitled to equitable distribution." Judge Sandra nodded. "And the allegations of forgery and fraud? Baseless. Every document in question bears both signatures, or was handled through proper marital financial channels. My client had authority, both legal and practical, to manage these accounts and properties." Patricia stood. "Your Honor, we have evidence of systematic theft and document fraud. The defendant forged signatures, created false loan applications, and filed fraudulent property claims. This wasn't marital financial management. It was criminal activity." "Do you have proof the signatures were forged?" "We have expert analysis showing—" "Expert analysis that can be contradicted by the defense's experts, I assume." Patricia hesitated. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge sighed. "Here's what we're going to do. Both sides will submit complete financial discovery within 2 weeks. I want every document, every transaction, every piece of paper that relates to this marriage, this business, and these properties. Then we'll reconvene and sort through this mess properly. 2 more weeks. 2 more weeks of my husband's legal team digging through my life, looking for weaknesses, building their case." I left the courtroom feeling defeated. Patricia tried to reassure me, but I could hear the worry in her voice. We were losing ground. That night, I sat in my home office, staring at the ranch deed. The forged one, with my husband's name added. I thought about my father, about his warning, about the promise I'd made. I'd let him down. Let him manipulate me, steal from me, corrupt everything I'd built. I'd been blind, trusting, stupid, but I wasn't helpless. Not yet. I pulled out my phone and called someone I'd been avoiding. Raymond, my father's old ranch foreman. He'd retired 2 years ago, moved to Arizona, but we still talked occasionally. "Kimberly, everything okay? I need to ask you something about my father, about the ranch." "What about it?" "Did he ever talk to you about my husband? About concerns he had?" Long pause. Yeah, he did." "Tell me everything." What Raymond told me changed everything. My father hadn't just been worried. He'd been actively investigating. He'd noticed discrepancies in ranch finances, small amounts missing from accounts, unauthorized equipment purchases. He'd suspected my husband but hadn't confronted him directly. Instead, he'd started documenting everything, keeping his own records, separate from the official books. He'd planned to show me everything, to warn me properly. Then he died. "He had a safety deposit box," Raymond said. In Bristow. Said it had copies of everything important, in case something happened to him. Did he tell you where? First National Bank on Main Street. He gave me a key. Said to give it to you if you ever needed it. I've got it somewhere in my stuff. Raymond, I need that key. Tomorrow, if possible. That urgent? Yes. He overnighted it. The key arrived the next afternoon, small and brass, with a tag bearing a box number. I drove to Bristow the next morning. The bank manager, a woman named Helen who'd known my father for decades, led me to the vault. Box 314. Inside was a folder. Thick, organized, tabbed. My father's handwriting on the label. For Kimberly, if you need the truth. I took it to a private viewing room and opened it. Inside were years of records. Financial statements from the ranch, with notations in my father's hand marking suspicious transactions. Photocopies of checks that had been cashed but never deposited properly. Records of equipment sales that never happened. A timeline of when things started going wrong, coinciding exactly with when my husband began taking interest in the property. But the real treasure was at the back. A letter, addressed to me, dated a week before my father died. Sweetheart, it read. If you're reading this, I'm gone and you've figured out what he's been doing. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I wanted proof first. I wanted to be sure. Now I am sure, and I'm taking steps to protect you and the ranch. I've documented everything. Every theft, every forgery, every lie. Use it. Don't let him take what's yours. Don't let him destroy what we built. I love you. Stay strong. Dad. Attached to the letter were documents I'd never seen. Affidavits from ranch hands who'd witnessed my husband trying to manipulate records. Statements from the ranch accountant about suspicious requests. Even security camera footage from the ranch office, showing my husband going through files when he thought no one was watching. My father had built a case, a complete, documented, irrefutable case, and I'd almost not found it in time. I spent 3 days going through every document in that safety deposit box. My father had been meticulous, tracking not just the ranch theft, but also making notes about suspicious activity with Thornwind Manufacturing. He'd seen the pattern before I had. One document stood out. A private investigator's report dated 6 months before my father died. He'd hired someone to follow my husband, document his activities. What they found was damning. My husband had been meeting regularly with a woman named Veronica. The PI's photos showed them at restaurants, hotels, her apartment. The relationship had been going on for at least 2 years at that point. But it wasn't just an affair. Veronica worked in commercial real estate. The PI's notes suggested they'd been planning something together. Discussions about property development, potential buyers for large parcels of land, investment opportunities. They'd been planning to sell the ranch, split the proceeds, and disappear together. My father had figured it out. That's why he'd changed his will so urgently. That's why he'd made me promise to protect the property. I photographed everything, made copies, secured the originals in a new safety deposit box under only my name. Then I called Patricia. I have everything, I told her. Every piece of evidence we need. My father documented all of it. We met that evening at her office. I spread out the documents across her conference table. She went through them slowly, her eyes widening with each page. This is incredible, she said. Your father built an entire criminal case. If we present this to the judge, we don't present it yet. She looked at me. What do you mean? I mean we let them commit fully. Let them present their case. Let them testify. Let them lie under oath. Then we destroy them with the truth. Patricia frowned. That's risky. If the judge rules against us before we present this, he won't. You said yourself. He wants complete discovery, wants everything on the table. We give him everything except this. We save this for the moment it matters most. When's that? When my husband stands up in court and swears he built everything. when he demands his $10.5 million and my father's ranch, when he thinks he's won. Patricia considered this. As a lawyer, she understood the risk. As my friend, she understood the need for perfect timing. Okay, she said finally, but we need a backup plan. If things go wrong, they won't. Over the next week, we submitted our financial discovery as ordered. Every document, every record, every transaction, except my father's file. Technically, it wasn't part of the marital assets, wasn't discovered during the marriage. It was inheritance material, separate property. My husband's team submitted their discovery too. Mountains of paper, all designed to show joint decision-making, shared finances, collaborative business building. They were building their narrative carefully. The full hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, depositions started. I sat through 8 hours of questioning from Jeffrey, answering the same questions over and over. When did your husband start contributing to Thornwind Manufacturing? He didn't contribute. He assisted occasionally with administrative tasks. But he attended client meetings, sometimes as my spouse. He negotiated contracts? No, I negotiated all contracts. He managed financial accounts. He had no authority to manage accounts. But he did access those accounts? Without authorization, yes. Round and round, twisting my words, trying to make assistance sound like partnership, presence sound like contribution. My husband's deposition was scheduled for the following week. Patricia conducted it, and I sat in the room, watching him perform. I built that company, he said confidently. Kimberly had the technical knowledge, but I had the business sense. I managed relationships, handled negotiations, made strategic decisions. Without me, Thornwind would have failed in the first year. Can you provide specific examples of these strategic decisions? Patricia asked. He rattled off a list. Client accounts he'd supposedly secured, contracts he'd supposedly negotiated, business problems he'd supposedly solved. All lies. But convincing lies, delivered with absolute certainty. And the ranch? Patricia continued. What was your involvement there? The ranch needed modernization. Kimberly was too emotional about it, too attached to her father's outdated methods. I saw the potential for development, for maximizing value. I initiated refinancing to access capital for improvements. You initiated refinancing without your wife's knowledge? With her implied consent. We discussed it many times. She denies that. He shrugged. Marital disagreements happen. Doesn't change the facts. Patricia pressed him on the forged signatures. He denied forging anything, claimed all signatures were legitimate, suggested that stress or time might have altered how I signed documents. Are you suggesting your wife forged her own signatures? Patricia asked. I'm suggesting that signatures vary, that handwriting experts can disagree, that this entire issue is being manufactured as part of a vindictive divorce. He was good, smooth, believable. If I didn't know the truth, I might have believed him myself. We also deposed his 3 witnesses, former Thornwind employees who'd agreed to testify. 2 of them were people I'd fired for incompetence. The third was someone my husband had hired himself, over my objections, who'd lasted 6 months before quitting. All 3 told similar stories, how my husband had been actively involved in business decisions, how he'd attended meetings, contributed ideas, guided strategy, how I'd been difficult to work with, emotional, unwilling to accept input. More lies. But coordinated lies, rehearsed lies, lies that fit together into a coherent narrative. After the depositions, Patricia and I regrouped. They're building a strong case, she admitted. The witnesses, the documents, his testimony, it all supports his version of events. But we have the truth. The truth doesn't always win in court, Kimberly, especially when the lies are this well constructed. It will this time. I spent the final 2 weeks before the hearing preparing differently. Not just organizing evidence, but understanding psychology. understanding how judges think, how courtrooms work, how to present truth in a way that cuts through deception. I also did something else, something my husband wouldn't expect. I reached out to Veronica, found her through the PI's records, tracked her down to a real estate office in Tulsa, called her from an anonymous number, identified myself, told her I knew everything. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, but her voice trembled. "I know about the affair. I know about the plans to develop the ranch. I know you and my husband have been working together for years. And I know that when this is over, he's going to throw you under the bus to save himself." Silence. "He's not who you think he is," I continued. "He's not a successful businessman. He's a thief who married into money and is trying to steal everything he can. And when he can't, when he gets caught, he'll blame you. Say it was your idea. Say you manipulated him. Say whatever he needs to say to protect himself. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know the truth before you get buried in his lies. You think you're partners? You're not. You're just another tool he's using." I hung up. Didn't know if it would matter. But I planted a seed of doubt. Sometimes that's enough. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. Lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. 15 years of marriage, 12 years of business, 8 years of managing my father's legacy. All of it coming down to one day in court. My phone rang at 2 a.m. Unknown number. I answered. "Kimberly." It was Veronica. "I need to talk to you." We met at an all-night diner on the edge of Tulsa. She looked tired, scared, younger than I'd expected. Maybe 30. Pretty in a conventional way, the kind of woman my husband would find attractive. She slid into the booth across from me. "I didn't know he was married when we started. He said he was divorced. They always do. I found out about you a year in. By then I was already involved. He said the divorce was coming, that it was just a matter of time. He said you were the one holding things up, being unreasonable. More lies." She nodded. "The ranch development was his idea. He said you'd inherited property you didn't want, that you'd be happy to sell. Said we could develop it together, make millions." I believed him. And now? Now I realize I'm not the first woman he's done this with. I found emails. Other women, other schemes. He's been running the same con for years, finding women in real estate or finance, using them to facilitate his plans. She pulled out a folder. I made copies of everything. The development plans, the emails, the financial projections. I don't want to be part of this anymore. I took the folder. Inside were emails between Veronica and my husband, discussing the ranch in detail. Property valuations, potential buyers, development timelines, and most importantly, explicit acknowledgement that he was forging documents and stealing assets. "Why are you giving me this?" I asked. "Because you were right. He'll throw me under the bus the first chance he gets. I'd rather control my own narrative." She paused. "And because what he's doing isn't right. Your father's ranch, your business, those are yours. He has no right to them." I looked at this woman who'd helped my husband plan to steal my inheritance. Part of me hated her. Part of me understood. She'd been a tool, just like I'd been a target. "What do you want in return?" "Immunity. I'll testify, give you everything, but I don't want criminal charges." "I can't promise that. But I can promise to tell the prosecutor you cooperated." She nodded slowly. "Fair enough." The hearing began at 9 a.m. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, wood-paneled and formal, with rows of benches mostly empty except for a few observers. My husband sat at the defendant's table with Jeffrey, looking confident and relaxed. He glanced at me once, smiled slightly, turned away. He thought he'd already won. Judge Sandra called the court to order and reviewed the case summary. This is a dissolution of marriage with significant asset disputes. Both parties claim sole ownership of various properties and business interests. We're here to establish the facts and make a fair determination of asset distribution. Jeffrey stood first. Your Honor, my client's position is simple. He spent 15 years building a life with his wife. He contributed his expertise, his labor, and his support to their shared success. He's entitled to equitable distribution of the marital assets, including the manufacturing business and inherited property that increased in value during the marriage. Judge Sandra looked at Patricia. Counsel? Your Honor, the evidence will show that the defendant contributed nothing of substance to the plaintiff's business or inherited property. More importantly, the evidence will show a pattern of fraud, forgery, and theft designed to steal assets he has no legal right to. Strong allegations. Can you support them? Yes, Your Honor, completely. The judge nodded. Then let's begin with testimony. Mr. Jeffrey, call your first witness. My husband took the stand. He was sworn in, settled into the witness chair with practiced ease. Jeffrey began with softballs, background questions, establishing the timeline of our marriage, his career history. Then they moved to the business. Jeffrey asked about his involvement with Thornwind Manufacturing, and my husband launched into his prepared narrative. I was there from the beginning, he said. Kimberly had technical knowledge, but she needed business guidance. I helped develop the business plan, secured initial financing, built relationships with key clients. The company wouldn't exist without my contributions. Can you provide specific examples? Jeffrey asked. My husband rattled off a list of clients, contracts, and business decisions. Some were partially true. He'd been present at meetings, had met clients. But his role in those situations had been minimal, social, ceremonial. He twisted presence into participation, attendance into achievement. And the ranch? Jeffrey continued. What was your involvement there? The property was underperforming. I saw potential for development, for modernization. I initiated refinancing to access capital for improvements. Kimberly was resistant, emotionally attached to outdated practices. But I moved forward because it was necessary for our financial future. Did your wife authorize the refinancing? We discussed it extensively. She may not remember authorizing it specifically, but it was part of our ongoing financial planning. What about the signatures on the refinancing documents? All legitimate. Kimberly signed the documents. If she's claiming otherwise now, that's unfortunate, but the paperwork speaks for itself. Patricia stood. Objection, Your Honor. The defendant is testifying about the validity of signatures that are the subject of fraud allegations. Sustained. Mr. Jeffrey, please confine questions to your client's personal knowledge. Jeffrey nodded and continued. For 2 hours, my husband testified about his essential role in building our life together. His business acumen, his financial management, his sacrifices, all delivered with perfect sincerity. Then it was Patricia's turn for cross-examination. You stated you were involved in Thornwind Manufacturing from the beginning. What year was the company founded? 2012. And what was your occupation in 2012? I was working in insurance sales. Did you have any experience in manufacturing, in metal fabrication, in industrial supply chains? No, but I understood business principles. What business principles specifically did you apply to Thornwind? He hesitated slightly. General management, financial oversight, client relations. Can you name 3 contracts you personally negotiated for Thornwind? Another hesitation. I'd need to review records for specific names. Can you name one? The Henderson account. I was instrumental in securing that contract. Patricia pulled out a document. This is the Henderson contract, signed by your wife alone. No mention of you in the negotiations. No record of your involvement. Were you lying just now, or are you confused about your role? I was involved behind the scenes. Behind the scenes. Meaning what, exactly? Supporting my wife, providing guidance. Providing guidance she didn't ask for and didn't need? Objection, Jeffrey said. Argumentative. Sustained. Rephrase, counselor. Patricia nodded. Let's talk about the ranch. You testified that you discussed refinancing extensively with your wife. When did these discussions occur? Over several months. I don't remember specific dates. Can you remember a single specific conversation about refinancing? Silence. Can you tell the court where these conversations took place? Your home? The office? During dinner? More silence. You can't remember because they never happened, can they? I remember discussing it, but you can't provide any details because you're lying under oath. Objection. Jeffrey was on his feet. Your Honor, counsel is badgering the witness. Sustained. Counselor, stick to questions. Patricia pulled out another document. This is the refinancing application for the ranch. Can you identify your signature on this document? My husband looked at it. That's not my signature. Only Kimberly's signature was required. Exactly. Only your wife's signature. So how did you initiate this refinancing, as you testified, if you didn't sign anything? I handled the paperwork. She signed. She testified she never saw this paperwork, never signed it, that this signature is forged. Are you saying she's lying? I'm saying she signed it and forgot. Patricia held up the document. Your Honor, we have a handwriting expert ready to testify that this signature is forged. We also have evidence that the defendant had motive, means, and opportunity to commit this forgery. Judge Sandra looked interested. I'll hear that evidence. The rest of the morning was brutal for my husband. Patricia methodically dismantled every claim, exposed every lie, revealed every inconsistency. By lunch recess, he looked rattled, his confidence cracking. But Jeffrey wasn't done. After lunch, he called his 3 witnesses, the former Thornwyn employees. One by one, they testified to my husband's involvement in the business, meetings he'd attended, decisions he'd influenced, contributions he'd made. Patricia cross-examined each one, establishing that none of them had worked directly with my husband, that their knowledge was based on brief interactions or secondhand information. But the damage was done. They'd created reasonable doubt about who contributed what. Then Jeffrey made his closing argument for the day. Your Honor, this case is about a husband who supported his wife, contributed to their shared success, and is now being denied his fair share because the marriage ended. Yes, there are disagreements about specific details. Yes, there are signature questions that experts can debate. But the fundamental truth remains. My client built a life with this woman, helped her succeed, and deserves equitable compensation. He paused for effect. My client is seeking $10.5 million and shared ownership of the inherited ranch. Not because he's greedy, but because he earned it through 15 years of partnership and sacrifice. Judge Sandra looked at Patricia. Counsel, your response? Patricia stood. Your Honor, the defense has presented a story, an appealing story, but a false one. Tomorrow, we'll present evidence that proves beyond any doubt that the defendant is a thief and a fraud, that he forged signatures, stole money, and is attempting to steal property he has no legal right to. When we're done, the only question will be whether this is a civil case or a criminal one. The judge nodded. We'll reconvene tomorrow at 9. Both parties should be prepared for a long day. I left the courthouse exhausted. Patricia pulled me aside. Tomorrow is it. We present your father's evidence, Veronica's testimony, everything. Are you ready? I thought about my father, about his warning, about his trust in me to protect what he'd built. Yes, I said. I'm ready. That night, I reviewed everything one final time. Every document, every photo, every piece of evidence. I thought about the moment tomorrow when I'd watch my husband's face as the truth came out. when he'd realize he'd been caught, when he'd understand that his careful planning, his years of manipulation, had all been for nothing. I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I arrived at the courthouse at 8:30. My husband was already there, talking with Jeffrey, still looking confident. He saw me, smiled that same cold smile. He had no idea what was coming. Judge Sandra called court to order at 9 sharp. "Counselor, call your first witness." Patricia stood. The plaintiff calls Veronica Sullivan to the stand. My husband's face went white. He turned to Jeffrey, whispered something urgent. Jeffrey shook his head, looking confused. Veronica entered from the back of the courtroom. She looked nervous, but determined. She was sworn in and took the stand. Patricia began gently. "Miss Sullivan, how do you know the defendant?" "We were in a relationship for about 3 years." "During his marriage to the plaintiff?" "Yes." Murmurs in the courtroom. Judge Sandra banged her gavel. "Order." Patricia continued. "Can you describe the nature of your relationship?" "It started as an affair, then became a business partnership. He told me he was getting divorced, that he and his wife had an agreement about property distribution. He said she wanted to sell the inherited ranch but needed help navigating the legal issues." "What was your role?" "I'm in commercial real estate. He wanted me to help develop the ranch, find buyers, facilitate the sale. We were supposed to split the proceeds." "Did you believe the plaintiff wanted to sell the ranch?" "At first. Then I started seeing inconsistencies. Things he said didn't match up. I realized he was lying about having her permission." Patricia handed her a folder. "What is this?" "Emails between me and the defendant, planning the ranch development, discussing how to access the property, how to forge necessary documents, how to structure the sale to hide his involvement." The courtroom went silent. Jeffrey was frantically flipping through papers, trying to find a counter-argument. Patricia entered the emails into evidence. "Your Honor, these emails clearly show the defendant planning to fraudulently sell property he doesn't own, using forged documents to facilitate the theft." Judge Sandra examined the emails. Her expression hardened. She looked at my husband. "This is extremely troubling." Jeffrey stood. "Your Honor, we had no knowledge of these emails. This is—" "Sit down, counselor." The judge's voice was ice. "Miss Sullivan, continue." Veronica detailed everything. The affair, the planning, the realization that she was being used. She corroborated every fraudulent document, every forged signature, every illegal scheme. When she finished, Patricia called David, the forensic accountant. He walked through the financial analysis, showing the pattern of theft from Thornwyn, the unauthorized transfers, the fake loan applications, every number documented, every transaction traced, every forgery exposed. Then Patricia approached me. "The plaintiff would like to present additional evidence, Your Honor. Documents that came into her possession after the initial discovery deadline." "What documents?" "Evidence compiled by the plaintiff's late father, documenting the defendant's theft and fraud regarding the inherited ranch." She handed me my father's folder. I stood, walked to the judge's bench, and placed it in front of Judge Sandra. "Your Honor, my father knew what my husband was doing. He documented everything before he died. He left this evidence for me, to protect the family property. I'd like to present it now." Judge Sandra opened my father's folder slowly, methodically reviewing each document. The courtroom was silent except for the rustle of paper. I watched my husband's face as the judge read, watched the color drain from his skin, watched his hands start to shake, watched him realize exactly how thoroughly he'd been caught. The judge looked up after 20 minutes. Her expression was granite. "Mr. Jeffrey, I'm going to ask your client a direct question, and I expect a truthful answer. Did you forge signatures on ranch refinancing documents?" My husband looked at Jeffrey. Jeffrey looked helpless. Your Honor, I need to consult with my client. No, I want an answer now. Judge Sandra's voice could have cut steel. Did you or did you not forge your wife's signature on legal documents related to the ranch property? The silence stretched. My husband opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. The signatures were yes or no. The circumstances were complicated. Yes or no? He crumbled. Yes. The courtroom erupted. Judge Sandra slammed her gavel 3 times. Order, I will have order. When the room quieted, she continued. Did you steal money from Thornwind Manufacturing without authorization? My husband didn't answer, just stared at the table. Your silence speaks volumes. She turned to Patricia. Counselor, I've seen enough. This isn't just a divorce case anymore. This is criminal fraud, forgery, and theft. I'm granting the plaintiff full ownership of all disputed assets, Thornwind Manufacturing, the ranch property, and all associated accounts. The defendant's claims are dismissed entirely. Jeffrey stood shakily. Your Honor, we'd like to request... Sit down. I'm not finished. Judge Sandra looked at my husband with pure disgust. Furthermore, I'm ordering you to pay restitution for all stolen funds plus damages, and I'm referring this case to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. Bailiff, please contact the sheriff's office. My husband's face went from white to gray. Your Honor, please. You forged legal documents. You stole hundreds of thousands of dollars. You attempted to defraud your wife of her inheritance. Did you think there would be no consequences? The bailiff was already on the phone. My husband turned to look at me, and for the first time I saw real fear in his eyes. Not the fear of losing money or property, the fear of going to prison. Patricia leaned close. It's over. You won. But I wasn't finished. I stood. Your Honor, there's one more thing. Judge Sandra looked at me. Yes? I want him to say it, out loud. I want him to admit he built nothing, that he stole everything, that every word he said on that stand was a lie. The judge considered this, nodded. The defendant will make a statement for the record. Stand up. My husband stood slowly, like a man walking to his execution. Tell the court the truth, Judge Sandra ordered. All of it. He took a shaking breath. I didn't build Thornwind Manufacturing. Kimberly built it. I had no real role in the business beyond occasional administrative help. I lied about my involvement. Continue. I stole money from company accounts. I forged signatures on bank documents. I created false loan applications using Kimberly's identity. I tried to steal the ranch by forging refinancing paperwork and adding my name to the deed without her knowledge or permission. And your testimony yesterday? All lies. Every word of it was lies. Judge Sandra looked at me. Satisfied? Yes, Your Honor. She turned back to my husband. You are ordered to surrender your passport immediately. You are not to leave the state of Oklahoma pending criminal investigation. You are to have no contact with the plaintiff or any of her properties or businesses. Any violation of these orders will result in immediate arrest. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Good. This hearing is adjourned. Bailiff, escort the defendant to provide his statement to the sheriff's deputies waiting outside. The gavel fell one final time. I watched 2 deputies enter the courtroom, watched them approach my husband, speak quietly to him, then lead him toward the door. He looked back once. Not at me. At the folder on the judge's bench. My father's folder. The evidence that destroyed him. Then he was gone. Patricia put her hand on my shoulder. How do you feel? Tired, relieved, angry that it took this long. Your father would be proud. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Because she was right. My father had protected me even after death, had trusted me to use his evidence wisely, had known I'd find it when I needed it most. Outside the courtroom, reporters were waiting. News had spread fast about the dramatic hearing. I made a brief statement, thanked the court, thanked my legal team, said I was grateful justice had been served. Then Patricia shepherded me to her car. "What happens now?" I asked as we drove away. "The criminal investigation will take months. Based on what the judge saw, I'd expect charges for fraud, forgery, grand theft. He's looking at serious prison time. And the divorce? Uncontested now. The judge already granted you everything. We just need to file the final paperwork. You're free, Kimberly. Free of him. Free to move forward. Free." The word felt strange. 15 years of marriage, months of legal battle, and now it was just over. We drove to Patricia's office. David was waiting with champagne, but I wasn't in a celebrating mood. Instead, we sat and talked through next steps. Securing the properties, changing account access, filing restraining orders, the practical aftermath of legal victory. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Kimberly." A man's voice I didn't recognize. "Yes? This is Gerald, your father's attorney. I just heard about the hearing. I wanted you to know. Your father would have been incredibly proud of you today." My throat tightened. "Thank you." He knew this might happen. He prepared for it. But he also knew you'd be strong enough to fight it. He was right. After we hung up, I sat quietly for a moment. Patricia and David gave me space. Then David spoke. "Your father was a wise man. He didn't just leave you evidence. He left you a lesson." "What lesson?" "That family legacy isn't just about money or property. It's about character. About standing up for what's right. About protecting what matters." He paused. "You protected it. That ranch is safe now. Your business is safe. Everything he worked for is safe because you had the courage to fight." I thought about the ranch, about cattle grazing on land my grandfather had cleared, about my father riding fence lines in the early morning, about the promise I'd made to protect it. Promise kept. The weeks after the hearing moved quickly. My husband was formally charged with 23 counts of fraud, forgery, and grand theft. His bail was set at $500,000, money he didn't have since all the stolen assets had been frozen. He sat in county jail awaiting trial. Jeffrey dropped him as a client. Too much evidence, too much publicity, too much damage to his own reputation. My husband had to rely on a public defender, someone overworked and underprepared for the mountain of evidence against him. The 3 witnesses who'd testified for him, the former employees, were investigated for perjury. 2 recanted their statements, admitting my husband had paid them to lie. The 3rd stuck to his story and ended up charged alongside him. The district attorney was thorough, and she was angry about the level of deception that had been attempted. Veronica cooperated fully with prosecutors. She provided every email, every document, every piece of evidence about the attempted ranch fraud. In exchange, she received immunity from prosecution. She also lost her real estate license and left Oklahoma entirely. Last I heard, she'd moved back east somewhere, trying to rebuild her life away from the wreckage. Thornwind Manufacturing thrived once I removed every trace of my husband's influence. I changed all the locks, all the passwords, all the account access. Brought in a new financial officer David recommended, someone with impeccable credentials and zero connection to my past. We had our best quarter in company history 3 months after the hearing. Clients who'd been nervous about the divorce drama relaxed once they saw the business was stable and under clear leadership. Some even admitted they'd never trusted my husband, had always dealt with me directly, had been relieved when the truth came out. The ranch became my refuge. I drove out to Bristow every weekend, walked the property, checked on the cattle, sat on the porch where my father used to sit. The foreman I'd hired to replace Raymond was good, respectful of the land, careful with the animals, understanding that this place was about more than profit. I found my father's old journals in the ranch house one Saturday afternoon. He'd kept records of everything: cattle counts, weather patterns, repairs needed, thoughts about the future. The entries from his final year were different, more personal, more worried. Kimberly seems happy, but I see signs, one entry read. Her husband is too interested in the business, too focused on money. He asks questions about the ranch that bother me. I need to protect her, need to make sure she's safe if something happens to me. Another entry, dated a month before he died. Started investigating. Don't like what I'm finding. He's been stealing from her company. Small amounts, but consistent. And he's been asking the ranch accountant about property values, about refinancing options. He's planning something. I need to document everything. Need to leave a trail she can follow if I'm not here to help. My father had known, had seen the danger, had prepared me for a fight he knew was coming even if I didn't see it yet. I sat on that porch and cried. Not from sadness, from gratitude. Because my father's love and foresight had saved me. Had saved everything we'd built together. 6 months after the hearing, my husband's trial began. It lasted 3 days. The evidence was overwhelming. The forged signatures, the stolen money, the fraudulent documents, all of it presented in clear, undeniable detail. His public defender tried to argue diminished capacity, emotional distress, anything that might reduce the charges. The jury deliberated for 90 minutes. Guilty on all counts. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Judge Sandra presided again. My husband stood before her, diminished and defeated, barely recognizing as the confident man who'd tried to steal my life. You betrayed someone who trusted you, Judge Sandra said. You stole not just money, but peace of mind, security, and the legacy of a hard-working family. Your actions were calculated, methodical, and utterly without remorse until you were caught. The court sentences you to 12 years in state prison, with restitution of $874,000 to be paid upon release. 12 years. He'd be nearly 60 when he got out. His life, whatever he'd planned for it, was over. I didn't attend the sentencing, didn't need to see it. Patricia called me with the news, and I felt only a distant sense of closure. Not satisfaction exactly. Just the knowledge that justice had been served. The divorce was finalized 3 months after his conviction. Uncontested. Simple. Clean. I kept everything. The business, the ranch, the house. He kept nothing but his prison sentence and his debt. I changed my name back to my maiden name, reclaimed my identity. Became Kimberly again. Not someone's wife, just myself. Life settled into a new rhythm. Thornwind continued to grow. I hired 2 new engineers, expanded our product line, opened a second facility in Tulsa. The business my father helped me start became something even bigger than either of us had imagined. The ranch stayed exactly as it was. Working cattle land, preserved and protected, generating modest income, but more importantly, preserving a legacy. I brought Claire out one weekend, showed her the journals, told her everything that had happened. She cried too, for what we'd almost lost, for what we'd saved. Dad was always 3 steps ahead, she said, even at the end. He trusted me to finish what he started, I replied, to protect what mattered. You did more than protect it, you honored it. I thought about that later, standing on the same spot where my father used to watch the sunrise. About honor and legacy and what we leave behind. He'd left me property and evidence and lessons. I'd used all of it to fight back, to reclaim what was mine, to prove that truth could overcome deception. My husband faced consequences beyond prison. His family disowned him. His friends abandoned him. His professional reputation was destroyed. He'd have nothing waiting when he was released except debt and shame. The life he'd tried to steal from me had vanished, and the life he'd built on lies had crumbled completely. Meanwhile, I moved forward, built new friendships, traveled, spent time with Claire's kids, teaching them about the ranch the way my father had taught me. Found peace in work and land and the knowledge that I'd fought for what mattered and won. The folder my father left me stayed in a safe deposit box in Bristow. I visited it occasionally, read his notes, remembered the moment I found it, and realized he was still protecting me even after death. That folder had been my weapon, my shield, my proof that truth and preparation could overcome years of carefully constructed lies. One morning, almost a year after the trial, I stood on the ranch porch with coffee and watched the sun come up over land my grandfather had cleared, my father had protected, and I had saved. The cattle were moving slowly toward the water tank. The grass was green from recent rain. Everything was exactly as it should be. I thought about revenge, about justice, about the difference between the two. Revenge is personal, hot, driven by anger. Justice is cold, methodical, driven by truth. What I'd done was justice. I'd simply revealed what was already there: the theft, the lies, the betrayal. I hadn't destroyed my husband. He'd destroyed himself. I'd just made sure everyone could see it. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. "Lunch this week? Want to celebrate your 1-year anniversary of freedom." I smiled. Texted back. "Yes, and thank you. For everything." Because that's what it was. Freedom. Not just from a bad marriage, but from deception, from being underestimated, from someone else trying to control my life. I was free to build, to grow, to honor my father's memory by living the life he'd wanted for me. The sun cleared the horizon, painting the sky orange and gold. I raised my coffee cup in a silent toast. To my father, who'd seen the danger and prepared me to fight it. To Patricia and David, who'd helped me navigate the legal battle. To my own strength, which I hadn't fully recognized until I needed it most. And to the ranch, the business, the legacy, all of it saved. All of it mine. All of it proof that sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let someone take what isn't theirs. I'd started this journey betrayed, angry, and afraid. I'd ended it stronger, wiser, and certain of who I was and what I was capable of protecting. My husband had tried to steal my fortune, my inheritance, and my future. Instead, he'd lost everything while I kept what mattered most. Sometimes justice takes time, but when it comes, it's worth the wait.